In this series of what I call meditations on Hindu sacred texts, this is the 5th verse that I am sharing, meditating, and discussing with you. We started with a verse from the Isha Upanisad. The first verse you will remember, Isha Vasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjita ma grida kasya svidhanam. All that exists in this world of change is pervaded by God, by the divine. Give up and enjoy. Do not covet anyone's wealth. And then we also looked at another verse from Isha Upanishad, Yastu sarvāni bhūtāni atmanyeva nupashyati sarvabhūteshu chatmanam tatona vijugupsate. One who sees all beings in the divine, and here the word Atman is used, and the divine Atman in all beings, does not hate anyone. Na vijugupsate. We went then to a verse from Kena Upanishad. You remember that discussion on Shreyas and Preyas. Shreyascha Preyascha Manushyametastav Samparitya Vivinakta Dhiraha Shreyo hi dhiro abhipreyaso vrinite Preyo mande yogakshemam vrinite. That both the good and the pleasant offer themselves to human beings. The thoughtful person examines, distinguishes between them, and prefers the good to the pleasant, gives the good a higher value than the pleasant. The thoughtless, however, chooses the pleasant for the gain and preservation of wealth. And then on the last occasion we met, we also took up a verse from the Katha Upanishad, Na virato duscharitan, na shanto na samahitaha, na shanta manaso vapi prajna nenainam apnuyat. That no one who has not turned away from unethical actions, whose senses are not under control and whose mind is not focused, or whose mind is not at peace, can gain knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of the divine. Today, I want to take up with you a verse from an Upanishad that we have not yet encountered in this series, which is the Svetasvatara Upanisad. It is an Upanishad that comes from the Yajurveda, Svetasvatara Upanishad, from Yajurveda. And the verse is verse 11 of chapter 3. And Arunji shared that verse in the announcement that he sent around. So here is the verse. Sarvānanaśirogrīvaḥ sarvabhūtaguhāśayaḥ sarvavyāpī sa bhagavāṃs tasmāt sarvagataḥ śivaḥ. Sarvānanaśirogrīvaḥ. All faces are its faces, all heads are its heads, all necks. That one dwells in the heart of all beings, sarvabhūtaguhāśayaḥ, sarvavyāpī. It is all pervading, or he is all pervading. He is Lord, bhagavāṃs. Tasmāt sarvagataḥ śivaḥ. And in this verse, for that ultimate one, the Rishi uses the word Shiva, the one who is all goodness. I should say, by way of introduction, that Svetasvatara Upanishad personalizes Brahman as Shiva. So often uses the word Shiva for the divine one. So let us begin with some background to this particular verse to make it meaningful. And I want to start with a popular understanding of the divine, of God. So please follow me as I move through this meditative process. A popular understanding of God found in many of our religious traditions, including some forms of our Hindu tradition, represents God as a person, very similar to a human person, a human being. Of course, there are some differences. God is regarded as all-knowing and all-powerful, omniscient and omnipotent, but still conceived in what we might speak of as anthropomorphic terms, or having human qualities and attributes. So God is thought of as a special being, but as one being, a being among many beings. And sometimes such a God is located in a place or a region of the universe distant from our space and our world. And this may be a heavenly world. And from this location, God creates our world in another part of the universe, distant from his own abode. So our world is understood to be separate from God and God's world, and God may from time to time intervene in our world. So in this model of understanding God or the divine, we are literally separate from God by space and even by time. And as we learn more about the unimaginable vastness of the universe, God gets pushed further and further away from us. This God is sometimes described in the language of royalty as king, lord of the world, exercising authority over ours from a distant place, a distant kingdom. Now, this way of thinking about God continues to be influential, but it is not what we find in the teachings of the Upanishads. It is important that we understand these differences. So I have given you a very popular portrait of the way in which God may be taught about, but I'm saying that this is not the teaching of the Upanishads. What is that teaching? The Upanishads begin with the existence of one being, one divine being, one sacred infinite, before anything else. So there are so many verses that I can share about this, but here are two examples. Aitreya Upanishad begins with a very beautiful verse, that before anything came into being, there was this one reality. Om Atmava idam eka evagra asit nanyat kinchana mishat. Nothing else even winked. There was just this one alone, nothing but the one. And Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 6, similar verse. In the beginning, there was one being alone. Sad eva, idam agra asid. One being alone, without a second. Ekam eva, one alone, not two. Ekam eva advitiyam. To say that one being alone existed before anything else, before everything else, means that there was no space, there was no time, there was no other material, nothing existing other than this one. Ekam, one. It is not as if space and time existed before everything else, and in one part of space existed this divine being, and this divine being created the universe in another part of space. That's not what the Upanishads teach. Before the many, there is one whole undivided being, one whole undivided reality, Ekam Sat. There is no outside, and therefore there is no inside. There is nothing other than this one, no other material to create from, since nothing but this one exists. This is the teaching of the Upanishads. And so with such a teaching in mind, any creation must come only from this one. And anything that comes forth from this one can only exist within this one. If we described the universe as coming from something other than this one, or as existing outside of this one, then we would limit this one. We'll place limits on this one, because just think about it. If creation comes from something other than the one, then this one becomes limited because it is now dependent on something other than itself to create. For example, if you gave me a lump of clay and you told me, make something out of this clay, I can only make a clay object for you because I am limited by what I have, which is clay, and by the possibilities of clay. So if the one has to depend on something other than itself to create, then it becomes limited and dependent on the nature of that material. And similarly, if creation exists outside of the one, then the one is limited by space, since the implication is that there is a space where it is not. If we speak of anything existing outside of Brahman, the sacred infinite, then we are constructing boundaries around this one divine reality. So to avoid these problems, the Upanishads emphasize two important teachings. First, the Upanishads describe this wonderful universe as coming from the one. The one brings forth everything out of itself. Sometimes the language of self-multiplication is used. Let me become many. So in Latin, we may refer to this teaching where the one brings forth everything out of itself as creatio ex Deo. Deo is the divine. Creatio ex Deo, creation from the divine. And second, the Upanishads always describe the created universe existing within the one. Since there is nothing outside, there is no outside of the one for anything to exist. And again, there are so many verses that we can offer to support these teachings. Some of these we have studied in this series. The very first verse, Ishavasyamidam sarvam. Everything is pervaded by God. Whatever exists, yat kinchit, jagatyam jagat. Whatever it is that exists is covered, filled, pervaded by God. And we also saw again in the Isha Upanishad, yastu sarvāni bhūtāni atmanyeva anupashyati, one who sees all beings in this one, and this one in all beings. These are Upanishad verses, but if you looked at a text like the Bhagavad Gita, you would find so many similar verses. For example, the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Yo Mam Pashyati Sarvatra, those who see me everywhere, Sarvatra, and Sarvam Chamai Pashyati, and everything, Sarvam, in me. Those who see me in everything and everything in me. Naturally, Krishna says, Tasyaham na pranashyami, sachame na pranashyati. For those I am never absent. I am never away from them, nor are they away from me. Why? Because they see everything in me and they see me in everything. So what is so clear, transparently clear in all of these verses? And as I said, in many more like these, is that the universe that includes all of us is never separate from the sacred infinite. It exists in this one, and this one exists in it. It is both, as we say in more technical language, the divine is both immanent in the universe and transcendent, always more than the universe. So this is, if I would put it in this way, this is a core Upanishad teaching. As the cause of all that exists, the one creator is present in everything created. Because effects do not exist separately or independently of their causes. We speak of this teaching as Satkaryavada, the teaching that the effects are not separate from their causes. If I have a piece of cotton and I make a cotton shirt, then the cotton shirt is the effect, the cause is in the effect. The cotton is in the effect. The effect is never separate from its cause. Satkaryavada, this is the teaching. So this verse from the Svetasvatara Upanisad, sarvānanaśirogrīvaḥ, all faces are his faces. All heads are his heads. All necks. He dwells in the hearts of all beings. He is the all-pervasive, all-pervading bhagavāṃ. Therefore, he is omnipresent. Tasmāt sarvagataḥ śivaḥ, the omnipresent Shiva. Sarvabhūtaguhāśayaḥ, this one exists in each heart, in every heart, as the animating, the enlivening consciousness, because of which we think, we see, we hear, we smell, we taste, we touch. In the absence of that one, there is no mental experience, there is no sense experience. All sense organs, all organs of action function only because of the presence of that one. That gives life. That is life itself, if I would say so, in every physical form. And this sustaining activity is ongoing. The universe never exists independently of God. In the absence of God, the universe is not. So every mental act, every physical act is possible only because of that one who dwells, the indweller in every heart. We have a sense of self, a sense of I, only because of that one. So since this divine reality exists in all forms and gives life to every form, then we may rightly say, as this verse says, that all faces are his faces or its faces, all heads are his heads, all necks are his neck. Sarvānanaśirogrīvaḥ. We have seen other similar verses, again, Bhagavad Gita. Sarvataf pani padam tat. Everywhere are his hands and his legs. All hands are his hands. All legs are his legs. Sarvato shishiro mukham. All eyes, heads, faces. Sarvataf sruti malloke. All airs. Sarvam avritya tishtati. In this way it exists, pervading everything. A very beautiful verse from 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And those of you who are familiar with the great Rig Veda composition, the Purusha Suktam, know that it starts like that. Sahasra Sirasha Purusha, Sahasraksha Sahasrapad. This one has 1,000, just an arbitrary figure, 1,000 heads, all because all heads are its heads. So What does this verse imply? What is the relevance of this verse for our understanding of our world, ourselves, and our relationships with other beings? In all of these Upanishad verses that we are studying together, meditating on, we see two things. The verse offers us an insight about the nature of the sacred infinite, and then the verse also suggests what might be the implication of this understanding for our lives in this world. So how does this verse speak to us? And there are two things that I want to emphasize. First, the universe is a sacred reality. The world is a sacred reality. Many versions of science are materialist and, as we say, reductionist in their understanding of reality. And by this I mean that many versions of science deny the existence of any deeper reality that grounds and pervades the world that we experience through our senses, the world of matter. And such views limit reality to materially measurable phenomena. But in the Upanishads, we can say that the universe is a sacred reality. And by this I mean that the Upanishads affirm the truth of a deeper, as we see in this verse, a deeper and all-pervasive reality that is immanent in matter, but not limited by matter. The material world does not exist independently of this infinite reality. It does not exist separately from this sacred reality. Its existence is dependent on the all-pervasive one referred to as in this verse as Shiva. So if the universe is a sacred reality, then we should experience it as a sacred reality. And this is what we find. The invitation to experience the universe as a sacred reality. In Bhagavad Gita, Raso hamapsu kaunteya, experience the divine in the taste of water. Every day we drink water. Water makes life possible. The divine is in the taste of water. Prabhamsi shashi suryayoho. We experience each day the radiance of the sun. We are invited to see the divine in the light of the sun. Punyo gandha prithivyam cha. We walk on the earth. We are sustained by the gifts of the earth. And we are invited to experience the divine in the fragrance of the earth. It's a beautiful way and poetic way in which the Gita speaks of it. Punyo gandha prithivyam cha. Jivanam sarvabhūteshu, as life in all beings. Tejasya chasmi vibhavasau, as the brilliance in fire. These are just examples of what it means to experience the world as a sacred reality. And this very Upanishad that we are studying, Svetasvatara Upanisad, gives us some very beautiful ways of seeing the divine in the dark blue butterfly, in the red parrot with green eyes, in the thunder cloud, in the changing of the seasons, in the ocean. In other words, everything in the universe is infused with the sacred, with the divine. But we have lost the eyes to see the world as sacred. And for this fact, we are paying a very high price. Second, human beings do not exist as separate and independent beings. Our existence is not independent and separate. The view of human beings as existing separately and independently is also connected with a materialist understanding of reality, not a sacred understanding of reality. So we would think of ourselves as existing separate and independent if we are not aware of our connectedness at the deepest level of existence and reality. And as we see in this verse, our faces, our eyes, our hands, all of us, all faces, all eyes, all hands, all legs, are the instruments of the divine through whom we are connected and related. There was one divine life in each one of us through whom we are connected. Therefore, every human encounter is also an encounter with the divine. Every human encounter is an encounter with the divine. And everything we see, as I said already, everything we see in the universe is filled with the divine if we had eyes to see. Therefore, I leave you with these two questions. What does this teach me? If one saw the universe in the way in which this verse invites us to see, what does this way of seeing mean for the practice of religion? What does it mean? What does the religious life require of us? What does being religious mean? What does this imply for our relationships with other beings? And keep in mind that when the Upanishad says all heads, all faces, all eyes are its eyes, its heads, its faces, it is not specifying human faces, human eyes, or human heads. It is inclusive. It is not, as we say, it is not anthropocentric. It is speaking very inclusively about all beings. How does this transform our relationship with each other? Well, let me finish with a story that maybe some of you know. It's a beautiful story. I just will tell the story and leave it. You may have heard the story in one version or another before. It's a story of Ganesha. So in this story, it was a bright and beautiful day on Kailash mountain. Ganesha went out to play, and he enjoyed looking at the butterflies and listening to the singing of the birds. And suddenly a cat walked up to him, and he was very pleased. He thought, let me become this cat's teacher today. So he approached the cat and he held up the two front paws of the cat and wanted the cat to dance with him. And after some time, Ganesha said, now I will release your paws. I want you to continue standing on your two legs and dance with me. I'm not going to hold your legs. You must dance with me standing on two legs. But as soon as he released the cat's paws, as you can imagine, the cat fell down, sat on its forelegs. Ganesha tried to make the cat dance on its own many times, but the cat could not do it. And now Ganesha got very upset and said, you are not being a good student today. I have to punish you for this. So in a fit of anger, he slapped the cat, and the cat's face was scratched. Of course, the cat was terrified and immediately ran away. It was approaching lunchtime, and Ganesha went back to his home and asked his mother, Mother Parvati, "Mother, is lunch ready? I am hungry." And she said, yes, Ganesha, lunch is ready, but let me put some bandage on my wounds first. So he was very protective, as you know, of his mother. And so he got very worried. He rushed in and said, "Who is it that hurt you? Who is it that scratched your face so badly?" And his mother said, "Ganesha, it was you." He didn't understand. "You must be joking, mother. How is that possible? I was playing outside with the cat. Someone else must have come in my place and pretended to be me. And that person must have scratched your face. And you could decide how the story concludes. She asked him, "Do you remember scratching anyone today?" And then he said, he was very shy and said, "Yes, it was a cat. But what does the cat have to do with your scratches?" And then his mother said, "Ganesha, you must understand that whenever you hurt anyone else, you hurt me." So I leave you with this story and then with the two questions. What does this verse mean for us, for our practice of religion and for our relationship with other beings? If we took this insight to our hearts, that all heads, all faces, all eyes, all necks are the hands, faces, eyes, necks of the one sacred infinite. Thank you very much.
Anand enjoyed it very much. I remember telling this story to the kids many times with Ganesh Festival. And really the message looks simple but powerful, because it's typically sarvātma attitude that we're talking about. Sarvabhūtaguhāśayaḥ attitude, where you recognize oneness in all. So you scratch an animal, is none different than divinity itself. So I think it's a very powerful message, powerful story. So thank you.
I thought you would recognize that story.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The Ganesh Festival is coming up in September now. So it's a part of the story too. So that's good. Enjoyed it. So interesting, as you gave various references. This is the 11th verse, I think 14th or 15th verse of the same chapter of same Upanishad starts the same as Purushottama's first verse.
Yes.
So very interesting. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Shashi. Thank you for your comment. Always good to hear from you. Thank you.
I found your way of expressing these ideas very, very inspiring. But I did encounter one issue that I disagree with.
Sure.
And that was your portrayal of science.
Yes.
Because in my perception, science teaches fundamental unity just as completely as the Upanishads do. That if you were to go through the materialist portrayal of the universe, you would find that everything is related to everything else, to the point that the elements and even some of the molecules that we are made out of come from exploding stars. Now, it's a total, the entire planet that we live on is an integrated system in which all components are interacting, human beings included, evolution teaches us that very clearly we are not different from those creatures that came before us. We are slight modifications.
Mhm.
We share tons of genes with other organisms.
Mhm.
So I would say, in contrast to what you said, that in this respect, science and the Upanishads are giving us the same teaching, not different teaching.
Well, no, Johnny, I really appreciate your comments. So I have, at least two things to say. One is that I was very conscious that I'm speaking to a group that includes people from science, and therefore I chose my words very carefully. I prefaced everything I said by some versions, some versions of science, because I think there's a difference between, as you will undoubtedly agree, between science and scientism, which is, and basically, I mean, surely everything that you said, I agree with, Johnny, that we are learning much more the ways in which our lives are interconnected with everyone and everything else, as you quite beautifully put it. But the reduction of reality to what can be materially measured, some versions of science, become very ideological about that claim. The claim that underlying this measurable material universe, there is an infinite ground, an unlimited ground, a unified ground, is, of course, so fundamental to the teachings of the Upanishad. But in some versions of science, and there are some, very strong advocates who would reject that kind of claim. So I don't think that we are really advocating different positions. I think there are versions of science that are very reductionist and materialist, but there are also other scientists who see, as you do, or at least who propose a more fundamental unity between the core claims of the Upanishads and what we are understanding about our universe through science.
I didn't
Go
imply that science somehow integrates the notion of an underlying some concept like Brahman. I didn't mean to say that. Only I see the parallels in the emphasis on unity and integration of the entire system.
Yes.
What else there may be beyond what is observable, that's a separate question.
Yes.
What science is.
I know, I understand you. And also one last point, Johnny, that we might pick up at some other point. And I think this is fundamental, that the Upanishadic understanding of this ultimate unity that is at the heart and ground of everything includes an ethical transformation, which is inseparable from the visions. In all of these verses, for example, we see, as we shared before, one who sees this one in everything and everything is one, does not despise, does not hate, does not reject anyone. So the awakening to the ethics of unity is something that needs more discussion. What are our moral and ethical obligations to each other that spring out of a vision of unity? I think that is the dimension that we must return study and speak more about. But Prabhat, did I hear your voice?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Rambachan. Actually, I really also enjoyed the talk. I have two quick comments and a question also. Basically, a reflection I would request from you. The quick comments, when you use the word reductionist, that's what kind of gave me the answer really, that it's a journey. So in order to really know the whole, we have to know little by little. So that's, so that's the journey of science, journey of our life, journey of, our journey actually in general, from all different points of view. That's the way I kind of take it. For your two questions, I think you just gave the answer before I started speaking. The ultimate unity, if we can realize, that's what the answers to those two questions. And that's your message, actually. So that's my second comment. And I would like you to reflect on, let's say I make a statement. Brahma is Shunya, or divine is absence. That's a thought that has descended on me, a few weeks ago. So, and the reason, maybe I'll give a little bit of my thought. So another way is, this one I have read, Jnani becomes Mauni. Jnani is the person with knowledge, Mauni is silent, or Jnana leads you towards silence, so to speak. So this part I have probably read somewhere or maybe heard. So what would be your reflection on that? So our journey kind of goes from gross towards subtle, towards the absence or zero, Shunya.
Thank you for your comments, Prabhaji. I think that, they are both very much consistent with what the ancient teachings of our Upanishads. Because while we are, what the Upanishads caution us, while we are constrained to speak about this one, while we are constrained to speak about the one and use our symbols and our metaphors, our language, it is also true that all of our languages fall short. We have in the beautiful sentence of Taittiriya Upanishad, that from which all words return, having failed to define, having failed to describe. So we are speaking, when we speak about Brahma, we are speaking about a reality. There is no other reality like that one. And all our language that has evolved to speak about finite realities will always fall short. And therefore, that's why you get the point about the language of silence also, that we must recognize our limits, and sometimes recognizing that by commending silence. I agree with that. I agree with that perspective very much, because I think if we all admitted, the limited nature of our language and our symbols, our discussions with others would be much more fruitful, rather than being, arrogant about the words we use, our language. We must be humble. In other words, yes, I hear you saying that. We must be humble whenever we speak about Brahman. We can only speak with humility. The beautiful section of the Bhagavad Gita, I'm sure you know very well, Ascharyavat pashyati kaschidenam. We can only speak of it with minds and hearts full of wonder, because it eludes all of our descriptions. And even when we speak about it, it repeats this word wonder, seeing the world with wonder, wonder, speaking with wonder, seeing with wonder, hearing with wonder. Ascharyavat is repeated. So I like the two comments you make very much, and very, very much in line with our Upanishad perspectives. So I thank you for that.
The comment for me is, first you talked about the two views, that some people see God or divine as something like almost royalty. They call it Lord, they call it, and they think of it as, God has authority over all of us, his creation or whatever. And that would be perhaps another model of what people see, that, they're comfortable with God is on top and we're just down here. Whereas our Upanishads and our Gita and everything talks about everything being a part of God and the divine. So, I just wanted to make sure that we know that you did cover both of these world views. Is that right? And that might be religions that feel one way and our religion feels another way. Is that what you were alluding to?
Yeah, so thank you, Nayana. Yes, so I started off, of course, with the Upanishad first, but I wanted to describe a certain way. And what I was most concerned in my opening part of what I shared this morning, is to describe a certain understanding of God, which separates the divine from the universe, places the divine, somewhere out there in space, and our universe occupies another corner of space. So what we call a very dualistic view of the relationship between the one divine and our universe. And then in that model, God occasionally intervenes in our world from his distant, or from her distant world. So having described that, Nayana ji, I was trying to say that that's very different from the Upanishadic understanding of God. And I would say also, Nayana, to add something to that, I would say that that is also a model of understanding God, who God is and God's relationship with the world, that is increasingly becoming problematic for many people. And even for, as Johnny was speaking earlier, even for people who bring a very science-oriented approach to thinking about our universe, the God as a distant being separate from our universe, that God, or that understanding of God, is increasingly being rejected by many in many of the world's religions, because it doesn't satisfy many people's reason. It is not a very reasonable. Whereas the Upanishad, I'm not praising the Upanishad above everything else, but the Upanishad has a very different understanding of God, in whom everything exists, who is the ground of all existence, from whom nothing is separate, and the one in whom everything exists. So I was trying to contrast the two points of these. Yes.
And can I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
When we talk about the world being uniform and we see God in everything, the divine,
Yes.
it's easy to do that when you see a beautiful sunset or a lovely scenery and a lovely forest, etc. It is not so easy to see that when you see sheer ugliness and grotesqueness, and etc. And yet you have to say that if we are part and parcel of the whole thing. So yes, there's beauty, but there's ugliness too, and that's also divine. So how do you read?
Yeah, well, you can, that's a good point. It doesn't mean that there isn't, what some traditions call evil and what we speak of as avidya and the outcomes of avidya in this world. There are many, the tragedies in the United States we live, we can give so many examples. The various forms of violence that we see increasing in our country and across the world. And yet, if we trace the roots of violence exercised, as you quite rightly said, in such tragic ways against each other, our tradition at the same time, will trace the roots of this back to a fundamental ignorance. So when we experience tragedy, yes, we should condemn it, but we also condemn it with a deep sense of mourning in our hearts, a deep sense of regret in our hearts, that if only we could help each other be awakened to the beauty, what you also describe as the beauty of life's sacredness. You know, the hope that every human being can be redeemed, every human heart can be changed. I mean, I don't think it's a hope that we can, if we give up that hope, I think our world will be in a much more difficult place. I mean, our tradition is optimistic at its core, that avidya can be overcome. Not that it's easy always, and not that its outcomes are to be trivialized, Nayana. The outcomes are very, very tragic. But it's also, like all religious traditions, ultimately we affirm a hope that is a source of and motivation for our life.